Hi guys, this is Taylor and I'm here today with my March wrap-up. In great contrast to my previous months, this was a good month quantity-wise, but not so hot quality-wise. Nothing I hated, but nothing that lived up to the standards set by January and February. I read 5 books, 2 of which were over 400 pages, which is highly uncharacteristic of me, I will admit. So let's get right into it. The first book I read in March was A Mango-Shaped Space by Wendy Mass. This is a very enduring piece of middle grade young adult fiction. I think I would call it more middle grade. Our main character is Mia, who is 13 and has the unique situation where she sees color when she hears sounds and music, and letters and words also have colors to her. Basically, she has undiagnosed synesthesia. That's not really a spoiler, and this is about her process of getting diagnosed and how it affects her relationships and school experience and things like that. I think the strongest aspect of this book was its depiction of synesthesia and its representation of it. It's presented in such a way where readers of any age can really empathize and get to know some of the problems that it could potentially cause. However, I found almost every other part of the book to be really cliche, especially the first 30 pages or so. I was physically cringing on almost every page. I just found so much of this book to be either way too overdone, idyllic, or way too convenient, and that unfortunately really hampered the reading experience for me. In the end, I gave this 3 stars. I think as a piece of literature, this was one of the very first that ever featured synesthesia and raised awareness of it, so I really respect it for that. But as a reading experience, for me, it was pretty so-so. The second book I read in March was one of the books I told myself I'd finally read this year, and that is The Cuckoos Calling by Robert Galbraith, J.K. Rowling. I'm not even really gonna intro this book, honestly. This is a very widely read, very beloved detective series by J.K. Rowling, etc., etc. Basically, this panned out exactly as I thought it might, which was that it was perfectly fine, but just not my cup of tea. I really don't care for mysteries or detective fiction. It's just not a genre that I really enjoy, and I think it's a genre where it's exceedingly difficult to not be formulaic. And in that vein, I did not think this book was bad, but it just did not change my mind about the mystery genre. It was kind of a slog for me. I switched primarily to the audiobook so that it would kind of propel me along, and the audiobook did really add to my enjoyment of it. It was very well done. But yeah, this overall was just not my thing, and I obviously can't fault it for that. I gave The Cuckoos Calling 3 stars. I think I will at least read the next one in the series and then determine my future involvement from there. If you've continued on with this series, definitely leave me a comment down below and let me know your thoughts on the second one versus the first one. The next book I picked up in March was finally The Parking Lot Attendant by Nafkate Chamarat. This was my second most anticipated release of 2018, and I ended up having some complicated feelings about it. So this has 2 settings. The first being an unnamed remote island, and the second being Boston, Massachusetts. We find out throughout the course of the book how exactly the main characters came to be on the island, so that is not really for me to say. But the bulk of the plot centers on our main character, who is unnamed, and she is a teenage girl who falls under the spell of a very charismatic parking lot attendant. This character's name is Ayale, and he is at the center of Boston's Ethiopian community. And that is really all I can say. The plot really centers on the relationships between our main character, Ayale, and our main character's father. The dynamic between our main character and Ayale was not what I expected it to be, and as seems to be the theme for my reading this year, was really one of the more interesting relationships I've ever read. It was very complicated. This was also a debut novel, and the writing style was not 100% up my alley. It's a writing style that is kind of deliberately unclear, or at least that was my perception of it. But as a result, my basic comprehension of this novel was kind of touch and go, although I did flag a lot of quotes and it definitely churned out some beautiful sentences. I enjoyed the reading experience fully. I think this is a novel that you could definitely read in a handful of sittings, and the plot ended up in a place that I did not expect at all. Just completely went a different direction, and I think I enjoyed that. Overall, just not what I thought it would be, but still enjoyable. I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads, but it was really kind of closer to a 3.5, and spoiler alert, I'm about to say that exact sentence 2 more times in this wrap-up. The 4th book I read in March was a piece of nonfiction, and this is Young China: How the Restless Generation Will Change the Country and Their World by Zach Diechtwald. You might remember that last year I read a book on China's education system that really got me interested and got me thinking about modern China and where they're going. Hi. I'm editing right now, and somehow a piece of footage got deleted where I basically say that Young China is a book that talks about just that, the future of China and Chinese youth, and it also does cover topics like the Chinese education system, and that's why I read it. Bye. So the author is this young American guy who, obviously in his case, is writing about China from a foreigner's perspective. And that perspective, but also the way that this is structured, made this seem a little more like a piece of travel memoir and less like hard nonfiction, which is fine, but I just would have gone into this with different expectations, you know? I do think that this book was very well researched, and I think that he covers these topics with the least amount of bias that he possibly can. He covers a wide variety of topics, most of which are really interesting, and which did add to my knowledge of what modern Chinese youth culture is really like. However, something a little weird to me was that there aren't any like hard conclusions formed about how exactly China's youth is going to change the world. Like, no specific information or even predictions. So again, I just think this was a little bit of a weird like marketing choice to me. But regardless, I think this was well-written, well-researched nonfiction, very interesting interviews and anecdotes. I gave this 4 stars, but it was probably closer to a 3.5. And the last book I read in March was Stray City by Chelsea Johnson. This came out on March 20th, so it is a brand new release. This is set in the 90s in Portland, Oregon, within the very tightly knit LGBTQ community. We are following a young woman named Andrea, who is a card-carrying lesbian, but who develops this relationship with a guy, gets pregnant, and to the complete shock and dismay of her lesbian friends, decides to keep and raise the baby. This book was very reflective of Portland in the 90s in many ways. It was almost too much at times. Like, no one seems to own cups or glasses, and everyone drinks out of mason jars, and Andrea's friend's reaction to the pregnancy is also, I think, pretty reflective of Portland at the time. Like, they're trying to be progressive about it, but they're so deeply disgusted by it, and they don't even try and hide it. Their reactions were actually almost difficult to read, but I think that's a really important topic to explore. Similarly, I think Andrea's relationship with the baby's father is very realistic and nuanced, and again, I think it's an important type of relationship to explore. Structure and plot-wise, this did take a long time to pick up, like maybe 150, 160 pages or so. And after the baby was born, there were some plot points that I thought were a little cliche, but nothing too bad. I definitely liked this novel, at least as a portrait of a specific place and time, and the ideologies that went along with it. And for the last time, I gave this 4 stars on Goodreads, but it's really closer to a 3.5. So that was March. A little unremarkable, but I'll still take it. Let me know what your March was like, reading or otherwise, and I hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you soon. Bye!